good afternoon to most of us on this webinar. For those of you that are a little bit later, good evening, and for those a little bit earlier, good morning. And no matter where you are, I just want to extend a warm welcome and thank all of you for spending a little bit of time with us today with the Active Directory Solutions team here at ManageEngine. Over the years, I have spent a tremendous amount of time talking about password policies, educating administrators and auditors on exactly how the Microsoft password policy works. And throughout those years, I constantly get questions around having different password policies in the same domain. And I am extremely excited about this particular webinar, allowing you to have another solution in providing that level of access. So this should be a very informative and very engaging webinar, and hopefully it's beneficial to you. A little bit of more information about me. My name is Derek Melber, and I am the technical evangelist for the Active Directory Solutions team here at ManageEngine. And what that means is I get the opportunity to travel the world, really helping organizations and administrators understand Active Directory better and then become more efficient and actually secure their environment more to try to reduce the attack surface from the attacks that are going on. We did have a 2016 world tour. You see some of the cities and some of the countries there that I have been to, and it was a very engaging and successful year for our seminars. And with that, we will be having a 2017 world tour as well. So please keep your eye out for us coming to a city near you, and I hope that you have the opportunity to come and introduce yourself to us and just sit down and have a talk about Active Directory. I do also want to point you to some resources. That is my email address. You also probably have an email address for the events team, the Active Directory Solutions events team, and please email me, email anyone here with any questions you have around Active Directory, group policy, security, really anything around Windows, and we'd be more than happy to try to tackle that for you or try to find you a solution. Being an Active Directory MVP myself, I'm able to contact some of my other colleagues in the Active Directory and group policy world, and if I don't know the answer, certainly someone out there knows the answer, so we can get you answers. I also want to point you to a couple of resources that we have available here. Let me do some cleanup here. If you go to ManageEngine.com and you come over here to Community, you will see that we have some blogs, and the very first blog alphabetically is Active Directory. And this blog is really dedicated to you, the Active Directory administrator. And what we try to do is we try to get you information that is a hot topic or a topic of question for Active Directory administrators around the world. So as I tour the world, I take questions and I put them into a blog. So you'll see here that we have information about automation, about cloud, I have information about security with group membership, more automation, and so we really try desperately to get you information in different formats, and that blog is 100% free for you to come and get the information. Another fantastic resource is our security hardening site, and to get to our security hardening site, it's a little bit confusing, but if you come to our main landing page, ManageEngine.com, and you click on Active Directory, you'll see a drop-down appear. And in the lower right-hand corner of this drop-down is our security hardening site. And this security hardening site is full of amazing information that really allows you to know where to set up security and what you need to pay attention to with regard to your Windows servers, your domain controllers, and Active Directory itself. And each of these areas of security have little blogs and videos that you can come in and you can see exactly what you need to do in those particular areas. So we really have some excellent resources out here for you. And again, this particular website is absolutely free for you to come and consume the information. So those are some very good resources that you have available to you. And we hope that you can come and partake in some of that information. I can guarantee you without a doubt that security hardening site has information in one location that I don't even know if you could find it throughout the internet, but it's in one location for you, and it's really myself and the entire team, the last 10 years of our experience with security and Active Directory, and that's what that site is all about. So please come and get the information. But today we are talking about passwords. And with passwords, what I want to do is I want to start at the beginning and I want to work our way through. There are still, after 17 years of Active Directory, still confused administrators with regard to how the password policy works. So what I want to do is I want to go in, talk about the password policy, break down the details, and then work through how the password policy is deployed so that we all have a complete understanding. And then I want to talk about some different password attack strategies and really what we need to have in place for those. So let's first of all talk about just the password policy details. Now, instead of just showing you slides, let's jump into the operating system here and let's look at it in real time. Now, what I'm going to do first and foremost is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to the Group Policy Management Console. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the default domain policy, which is where the default password policy is configured. And here under my security settings, account policies, password policy, you have this password policy. Now, this password policy was initiated to be this configuration starting in Windows Server 2003 SP1. And it was 2003 SP1 where Microsoft first initiated that a password was even required for Active Directory users. So this is what Microsoft has in place, and it's been this way really for, what, 14 years now, and it hasn't changed. And these are the settings that we have to control the password for Microsoft technologies. Now, of course, these are pretty obvious, but let's walk through them. Password history is going to remember X number of passwords that you've input, and you can't reuse them. So the default is 24. So that means, in essence, you can't use a password you can't reuse a password until after like 2 years. Okay. The maximum password age is 42 days. Now, I truly believe, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, where the 42 comes from. It seems kind of arbitrary. But really, if you think about it, a typical month is around 4 weeks. 4 weeks is 28 days. And then Microsoft, by default, gives users 14 days to reset their password. So 28 plus 14, 42. I think basically Microsoft is saying you can have your password for a month, and then you have 2 weeks to change it. So you have about a month and a half where you can have a password. And then, of course, this is by default. In order for users not to be able to cycle through 24 unique passwords to get to the original one, Microsoft put in the minimum password age and set it to 1 day so that users can't come in and cycle through those. The minimum password length is 7 characters and has been 7 characters forever. You know, there's many debates on whether it should be 7, whether it should be 8. I think once I show you some of the hacking technologies a little bit later in this session, it really doesn't matter if it's 7 or 8 or even 10. The new technologies can break into those. But really the 7 or 8 characters was all backward looking at LAN manager hashes and how the LAN manager hash was actually developed. And because there's 2 7-character portions, some people thought that if you went into the second portion of the LAN manager hash, that was more secure, which is completely fictitious based on how the LAN manager hash is developed. But anyway, that kind of gives you a little bit of background on that. The storing the password and reversible encryption, I have never seen that enabled or seen the need to enable that. It is disabled by default. And then, of course, we have complexity requirements. Now, complexity requirements has a full list of things that it actually implements. For example, it has a minimum password length of 6 characters. You can't use your username. You can't use your logon name. You have to use 3 of the 4 types of characters. And if you want the actual details on this, here is the list of everything that is associated with the password complexity. The password complexity is not customizable. So whatever you get in this particular list is what is there. You can't remove, you can't add. It is what it is, unless of course you go into some other technologies to try to increase that. So this is what we have by default, and for a newly installed Active Directory, this is what is put in place for all domain users, as well as all local users on computers where the computer has joined the domain. Okay? So the way this works in terms of the default password policy and the default domain policy is that the default domain policy for your domain controllers is what is configuring your domain controller's Active Directory database. So your domain users are in the Active Directory database, and by default, the default domain policy controls the password policy for those users. As computers join the domain, and it doesn't matter where the computer is in the domain, an OU, a container, it doesn't matter, the password policy from the default domain policy also affects those local databases of users. It's called the SAM, the Security Accounts Manager. So when you install Active Directory out of the box and you join computers to Active Directory, every single user has the same password policy. So by default, the password policy is configured by the default password policy in the default domain policy, okay? But you need to understand how it works from there. So let's walk through some different scenarios. Let's say that I have some executives, right? So let's go into Active Directory here. So here's Active Directory users and computers. I have some executives, Bill and Ron. And I want these users to have a more complex, a more stringent password policy. Now, if I go back to group policy here, and I go to the executives OU, and I create and link a GPO here, and I call it the exec password policy, and then I go into the exec password policy, and I modify the password policy here, right? And let's say that I make the minimum password length 14 characters, okay? This setting will not affect these users. So let me run through that again, because I know it's a little confusing, but I have to jump into different windows. I have users inside of an OU. That OU can have a GPO linked to it, and in that GPO I can have settings configured. But these settings in the GPO linked to the OU do not affect the users in the OU. Now, for some of you that are on this webinar, this may be new information to you, but this is how it works. And it's always worked this way, okay? Now let me prove to you that these users will not receive the settings in a GPO linked to that OU. GPO settings can affect two types of objects, right? Computers and users. The password policy, as you see here in the path, is a computer-based policy, not a user-based policy. So the settings in the GPO for your password policy can only affect computer accounts. Back here, these are user accounts, okay? So by default, out of the box, you can have one password policy per domain, and you cannot configure the password policy in a GPO to affect domain users. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about what this GPO actually does. This GPO linked to this OU will configure the computers in the OU. So if I had a computer in this OU, this GPO And these password policies would configure the local users and the local SAM on those computers in that OU, overriding the password policy that's linked to the domain. Okay? So I have the default domain policy, but if I have a GPO linked to an OU, it has higher precedence than the domain policy for computers that are in the OU. Remember, the acronym for Group Policy Application is LSDOU, Local Site Domain Organizational Unit. So the OU GPOs have higher precedence than the domain GPOs. So again, you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute. Can't I link a GPO here to affect my domain controllers because the domain controllers house Active Directory? No, you can't. It doesn't work that way. Only GPOs linked to the domain can configure the domain controller's password policy. Okay, now, if any of you have debate on that, I strongly encourage you to test it. I've tested this over and over again, 17 years ago, trust me, and I test it all the time. It's not going to change. This is the way it works. Okay? Now, one of the things that I highly recommend everyone on this webinar do when you're done with this webinar is to go verify what your current password policy is for domain users. You cannot do that by going to a settings report here for the default domain policy. And let me tell you why. The password policy doesn't have to be in the default domain policy. So here's the default domain policy. This is a built-in tool, which I'm going to suggest you run, seccpol.msc, and you run it on a domain controller to verify what the actual password policy is. You will notice that this is what's in the default domain policy, and this is what is actually in place for my domain users. Notice the mismatch. So the correct way for you to verify what the current password policy is to run seccpol, seccpol.msc on one domain controller per domain. Okay? You can also run that command on your servers and your desktops to make sure you know what the password policy is for the local users in those SAMs on those computers. So far, what we've discussed is all the settings, how the password policy applies, and the fact that we cannot have more than one password policy in the domain using group policy. Okay? So now that we've got past that, let's move on and let's talk about fine-grained password policies. Fine-grained password policies were first introduced in Windows Server 2008. So if you have Windows Server 2008 domain controllers, you can implement fine-grained password policies. Fine-grained password policies are not implemented with group policy. Fine-grained password policies are implemented using ADSEdit. Or if you have Server 2012 R2 domain controllers, you can use the new administrative console, which most people don't have, which is why I really don't show it yet. Okay? Now under ADSEdit, if you go to the domain naming context, which is really Active Directory, and you come down here, you can see an option for system and then password settings container. This password settings container is your fine-grained password policies. And this is where you can create a new object, and this becomes your fine-grained password policy. This wizard is going to walk you through the same settings that you have here inside of a normal password policy. It's just going to be implemented in a totally different way. So the way that you use fine-grained password policies is you set up a password setting container object. Okay? Once you have the object set up, You then go into the properties of that object, and you're going to modify the security of that object. Now this is after it's created, and you must give the correct group access to that password setting container. So I can have multiple password settings containers in the same domain, and they are implemented through group membership, not through OUs, through groups. Confusing? Yeah, I know. This is kind of the problem of using this technology. So now it becomes very complicated, right? Because I have SecPol over here telling me what my password policy is. Then I have password settings container. How do you know who has what particular setting? Well, Microsoft does provide some PowerShell commands for this, but I'm going to show you how clumsy they are. So if I do get help on fine, right, you'll notice that I have get AD fine-grained password policy. Well, I don't know which one of these it is. I don't know. And I don't even know what the rest of this says. So it really gets a little confusing. So I recommend that you get a tool. If you have fine-grained password policies, you need to get a tool that allows you to see who has what policy in place. Now, our tool, AD Manager, is one of those tools, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So if I come in and do a report on users, and I generate this, I can go and I can add or remove a column for the PSO that's applied. This is the password settings object. If there is no password setting object applied, it's getting the default password policy from group policy, whichever GPO linked to the domain that it's configured in, whatever SecPol tells you. If it's a PSO applied, then you have to go into that PSO, that fine-grained password policy, to see what the settings are inside of that. So it's a little confusing with the way that Microsoft has set this up by default. So using Microsoft technologies, we can obtain multiple password policies in the same domain, but only implemented at the group level, not based on your OU structure. But what we need to consider is whether or not the settings that are actually inside of a Microsoft password policy is even enough, right? So if I go back to my password policy, let's go back here, these settings were developed back in the year 2000. Well, Microsoft hasn't updated anything for password attacks at all. So we don't have the right technology to help against password attacks. Heck, it was only a couple of years ago that Microsoft even gave us more control over LAN Manager. So what we need to do is consider the new attacks that are here. So the password attack strategies have changed. So what we need is technologies to help beat them. Well, what strategies are in place? Well, let me kind of give you a summary of that. So I have a tool here called Kane. And Kane is a very powerful tool that allows for password cracking. And you'll notice that I have hashes here, and that if I have certain hashes, I can go in and do dictionary attacks, brute force attacks, and I can even do rainbow table attacks. So I have to be able to compete against these technologies. But each of these technologies has a way to combat it. Let's talk about each. Dictionary attacks. How do we beat dictionary attacks? Well, if someone is using a dictionary to attack my passwords, all we need to do as an organization is don't allow users to use words that are in a dictionary. Right? Seems easy enough. And I'm not talking about the Webster's dictionary. I'm talking about an attack dictionary, which you can download from the internet. Not just one, multiple. So if we can deny users from using dictionary words, this attack goes away. Brute force attacks. Well, brute force attacks are really based on the fact that you can use a multitude, let me go down here and show you what this looks like, a multitude of characters, right? Here's all the characters you can put in a password, lowercase, uppercase, number, and special. And I can use permutations of all of these characters in the minimum maximum length to develop an attack. So let's say, for example, that I go in and say, all right, I'm going to look at uppercase, lowercase number from 7 down to 9. And when I start this attack, you will see that it's taking the combination of characters from the character space and it's trying to basically develop the hash to see if I can know what the password is. But the most important thing about a password in beating brute force attacks is length. So notice, I have a complex password suite of characters, and it's going to take me 1,400 years with the hardware I have to try to break into a 7 or 9 character password. But watch this. If I move it to simply lowercase alpha, no complexity, but I up this to 20 characters, it now is going to take 2 times 1 to the 15th years to break into it. That's a long time. So you notice that length is the most important aspect of your passwords. So what I'm trying to get at here in getting multiple passwords in the same domain is those users that need better protection need longer passwords versus the users that have access to less important information. So IT, executives, developers, HR, finance, all these people need to have longer passwords to help beat against these technologies. Now the NTT group earlier this year at RSA came out with a really good white paper, and if you email me, you have my email address, I'd be more than happy to send you a link to the white paper, because they actually went through and they analyzed all the concepts around passwords, breaking down what normal users use for passwords so that we can alter that to make our passwords stronger. So the password attack technologies are out there, and what we need to do is we need to combat against them, okay? So what we need is we need solutions that allow our users and our organization to be protected against these things. So if we take some of the password attack strategies and we put them in place, then we're going to have better passwords. And if we can have multiple password policies in the same domain, now we can have the correct users having stronger passwords than the other users. So how do we do that? Well, we can't use Microsoft technology because they don't own it. So let me show you a technology that actually allows you to do this. This is a brand new feature in Active Directory, ADSelfService Plus. Now in ADSelfService Plus, we provide you more control. Now I'm going to jump in here to ADSelfService Plus, and I'm going to first of all talk through how you set this up and what options are available. Okay? Now the way that ADSelfService Plus works is that you're able to configure what are called policies. You'll notice them here. And policies are defined based on, oops, wrong button, based on OU or group, okay? So I can define, based on one or more OUs, a policy, okay? So you'll notice that I have a domain policy and I have a specific policy named RSA, all right? Once I have the policy configured, we have this awesome new feature called Password Policy Enforcer. And the enforcer allows you to have more control over passwords, and you implement them through the policy, which goes back to the OU level. So this is where we can match having password policies for users in OUs. This is how we match that. And because our policies can have more than one OU, right? I can select more than one OU. I can actually have fewer password policies than if I try to use Microsoft technology. So it's more efficient and it's more secure. As I said at the beginning, that's what I try to do, is I try to make things more efficient and more secure. So you'll notice that we have currently additional settings beyond what Microsoft provides. So we have password length that can go above the 7. We have password length that controls special types of characters. So you can read it yourself here on what we have. Plus we have the ability for you to input certain words, right? So this is going to deny the user from using any password that contains any of these particular words. Now, our newest version, which is coming out this month, our newest version of this tool, instead of you having to type in the patterns, you're going to be able to right-click and import a dictionary. Fantastic. Also, we're going to have other controls beyond this, such as you're not going to allow your users to use consecutive passwords, password 1, password 2, password 3. So we're giving you more control over the passwords at this level. So the way the tool works is any setting that's in here that is above that of the default domain policy, the domain password policy, or fine-grained password policies, this is going to take ownership. That's why it's called an enforcer. We're actually putting a layer on top of what Microsoft has. So you can have a base foundation through Active Directory or through fine-grained password policies, and then we come in and we add on top of it. Not only do we add on top of it for users in OUs, we also, no matter who tries to reset or change the password, even if they go into Active Directory users and computers to do it, we are going to control that user's enforcement. So even though an admin comes in here and resets the password for a user, it will go to ADSelfService Plus to ensure that password hasn't been enforced or made stronger. So now you have a solution. ADSelfService Plus allows you to have multiple password policies in the same domain configured at the OU level. If you want to do it at the group level, remember, you can do that because back here we give you either or option. So now you have a rock solid solution for multiple password policies in the same domain, giving you the flexibility at the OU for a group, and you have some amazing new controls beyond what Microsoft has provided so that we can actually defend against today's attacks on passwords, not the attacks from 17 years ago. So we are giving you the solution with ADSelfService Plus. Now with ADSelfService Plus, what's awesome for you also is that if you simply go to our main page, right, and you click on Active Directory and you go to Identity Management, Identity Password Management, you can download ADSelfService Plus for absolutely free. You can use it for 30 days. What I want you to do is I want you to see how easy it is to put this in place. Once you get it in place, of course you're going to put it in a test environment, but now you can see the power of controlling passwords in the same domain for different types of users. So what I've done is I've walked you through kind of the legacy, but it's really not legacy because it's what's in place today for Microsoft. Using Microsoft technology, trying to implement group policy for password policies, you can only have one password policy per domain. Yes, you can go to fine-grained password policies, but it's a totally different type of technology that's very difficult to actually see who has what policy. So with ADSelfService Plus, you know exactly who has what particular policy in place because it's based on the policies in ADSelfService Plus. You also have more in-depth granular control of the passwords so that you can strengthen that password to actually defend against password attacks. So this gives you a rundown of what you have now. I strongly encourage you to go run SecPol and find out what you have in place today. Test out the different technologies that Microsoft has, and then test out our technology so that you can increase the passwords for those users that need it. I've given you the secret decoder on how to get our product and use it for free for 30 days. If you need it for a little bit of extra, I'm sure that you can twist our arm and get it for, if you want to do a proof of concept across multiple domains, we'll give you 45, 60 days because we want you to be successful in making sure you're securing your environment. So hopefully you've been able to get some information from our webinar. If you have any questions around this or other topics, that again is my email. You have the email for our events team. For those of you that have been asking questions along the way, I noticed there are quite a few questions. We've actually had some other members of the AD Solutions team in the background helping with those, and I want to thank them. I want to thank you for asking, and I want to thank them for helping me as I chit-chat along answering your questions. If we didn't get to a question, we will answer you an email for that. If you have any questions after this, please email us. It's one of our goals to make sure that we can get Active Directory administrators' answers or questions answered as much as possible. So please reach out to us. I hope you really enjoyed the webinar. We will be having webinars throughout the rest of this month and throughout December. So please keep an eye out for our webinars. And we do record these, so if for some reason you want to view it again, or if you want someone else, another colleague, to view it, please send an email to us, and we'd be more than happy to handle that. So I'm going to let you get back to work and get your things done for the day, and hopefully some of you are leaving for the day soon. I hope to hear from you. And for myself, Derek Melber, and the rest of the Active Directory Solutions team, we thank you for your time. And until next time, this is Derek signing off, and I hope to see you or talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.